It's an honor for me to introduce our final and keynote speaker, Ashton Eaton. I'll now say 3 impossible sentences. Ashton won the decathlon at the London Olympics. He went on to repeat the gold medal in the decathlon at the Rio Olympics. In the process of doing that, he set 2 world records in the decathlon. If you think about that for a minute, the level of discipline, resilience, grit, pain tolerance, talent it takes to do that is simply phenomenal. He retired from sport on top after being dubbed the world's greatest athlete for the 2nd time, and moved to San Francisco to get involved in startup companies and software. As a mechanical engineer, I can say he made the very reasonable decision then to pursue a degree in mechanical engineering and work closely with Intel on AI and machine vision as it applies to sports and athletics. He's been an incredibly insightful and generous advisor to the Tsai Alliance, spending lots of time with all of us, and is a really unique person in his ability to bridge technology and sports performance and sports injury. And it's been really a great joy for all of us to have you engaged, and a real honor for me, Ashton, as a mediocre hurdler, to introduce you as our keynote. Thanks so much, buddy.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Scott. I actually feel a little bit nostalgic because my grandmother, Mary Jane Eaton, passed away 3 weeks ago, and she was a research scientist at this university for 40 years. She studied MS and tried to find a cure for it, which she actually had. And she and my grandfather always used to take me around this campus when I was young. And I think by the time I was 10, I had toured the grounds and every building like 3 times. I had so much Stanford gear, it was ridiculous. So even though I went to the University of Oregon, go Ducks, I always have thought fondly of this university, and it's always a pleasure to be back, especially with you all here trying to advance human performance, which honestly took me a while to appreciate, but I suppose I have a firsthand experience in doing that. And I think as a result of my athletic achievements, I have this kind of intrinsic and intuitive relationship with what it's like to get the body to do something. Even more importantly, get the body to do things I didn't even know it could do. And so I wanted to share a little bit, my goal is to share a little bit of that perspective with you with the short time I have. What it's like to be an elite athlete, how I think I was able to achieve the things that I did, and then from that perspective, explain what I think this alliance is doing and why I think it's important. So, what is it like being an elite athlete? Ask Scott. I don't know. Whether it's realized or not, every competition, every training session, every attempt in those training sessions is a test. It's an experiment. And in that experiment, the athlete, you, are the independent variable. And the reason is because all the outcomes depend on you. And of those outcomes, of the dependent variables, there are many. The stadium, the arena, the slope, the water, the trail, the track, the fields, the court, all these things are generally speaking the controlled environments. So you get where I'm going here. In my opinion, being an athlete is akin to being a scientist. And you don't have to try too hard to, I think, understand what it's like. I think there's more similarities in our thinking than there are differences. And the investigation for an athlete starts off with a question. What am I capable of? And like all great science, I think is followed by a guiding hypothesis. I believe I am capable of more. And I found myself, or at least I remember myself asking that question to myself when I was 7 or 8 in the 1,000-person town I grew up in the backwoods of Central Oregon. It was a hot summer day in the mid-90s, and I was outside with nothing to do because there was no internet. Actually, there's probably internet here. I mean, this is Stanford, so SRI or something, I don't know. But like the week before or something, I was in my elementary PE class, and we were doing like a fitness test. And they did things like jump rope and cup stacking and shuttle runs. But the thing that captivated me the most was the standing long jump. And there was something about kind of jumping from this mark and reaching some other mark with a tape measure and having that really measurable result and coming back and trying to go beyond it that just absolutely appealed to me. So here I was outside with no tape measure in the dirt, looking to see what I was capable of doing. So I grabbed 2 sticks and I set one in the dirt, walked a few paces away, set another one down. And then I got like a 50-foot lead in, and I ran and I jumped from the first stick, tried to clear the second one. And whenever I cleared the second stick, the mark in the dirt that I made, that's where I would move it. And so I kept this up for a while, but after not too long, I obviously was not clearing that second stick very much. And in fact, there was so much time in between these intervals that I was moving it that I thought, well, this is all I could do. I'd kind of stand back and take stock of the distance, be like, cool, that's what I'm capable of. But in each attempt, I would kind of change something. I would try something new. And on the rare occasion, whatever I did would equal that stick going a little bit further by a very small amount. And this idea of, I thought I had reached my limit, but I was totally wrong because I just did something that increased it. That idea of there being a possibility to advance that was enough to motivate me not only for that next several hours of trying to do that pursuit, but for the entirety of the athletic career that followed. And I think at the culmination of this athletic career became known as one of the greatest athletes in the world or whatever. And I think the question is, how did I go from sticks in the dirt in La Pine, Oregon, to a world record holder? And the answer is feeling and sight. What I mean by that is over several years, and I guess what amounted to tens of thousands of tests or experiments, I would ask my body to perform specific actions to get high-level outcomes. And what I would do is take stock of how my body felt before, during, and after this set of actions. My coach and I would look at what the result was, and then we visually try to understand what I did. We just look at what I did. And this amounted to what would be my data set. And there's only a few possible combinations of what you can do here. You can have a good set of actions that equals good outcome. It's a strong signal. You want to keep doing more of that. You can have a good set of actions that equaled a bad outcome. A little bit confusing, leads to more questions like, was the set of actions actually good? Is that technique something that works for me? Should I try something new, et cetera? You can have a bad set of actions that equal bad outcome. Obviously, you want to avoid those things. And then the most confusing of all, a bad set of actions equal a good outcome. What the hell is going on? Leads to its own set of questions. And basically, after a ton of years of doing this, we had a large amount of information of feeling, sights, and outcomes. And we were able to translate that into knowledge because we knew exactly the thing we were trying to achieve: faster, higher, stronger. And when we learned more, when we got more knowledge, we had better outcomes, more capability. Which leads me to this idea of the law of knowledge and capability. And all of the great natural laws of the universe have this awesome property that everything is in balance. And this made-up law of mine, I think, is also the same. Knowledge and capability, I think, are two terms on either side of the same equation. I don't think you can increase one without increasing the other. Just put another way, I think the more we learn, the more we tend to be able to do. The more we do, the more we tend to learn. And this was the case for me when I was training for, well, actually, as a result of this relationship, I think if you're not improving, then you either have a knowledge limitation or a capability limitation. And I think I had a knowledge limitation example in 2016 when I was training for the Rio Olympic Games. It was the spring. I was in phenomenal shape. I was doing these high frequency, high intensity, very fast workouts, getting ready to run and compete against fellow athletes outdoors. But I would have to cut a lot of these workouts short in over several weeks. And the reason was because my calves started cramping to the point where I was like limping to a walk to avoid getting injured or pulling something. And we did the natural stuff, address the hydration, address the nutrition, which all seemed fine. And so after a frustrating couple weeks, my wife suggested that we reach out to the sport nutritionist, sport physiologist she was working with in Canada. And when we talked to this person, who is in the audience today, they suggested that I get a sweat test done. And mine showed that I lose a significant amount of sodium chloride when I sweat. And so the simple solution was increase your salt intake, which I kind of laughed at because I had done the exact opposite the months prior. I was like harping on my diet and just, I think by a byproduct, avoiding extra salt and what have you. And so when I did this thing, the practices very rapidly went back to normal. And not only that, I went on to Rio, which was one of the most demanding hydration and heat environment management competitions I had been to. And not only, won, I think like tied the Olympic record or something. And so, this is a very simple example of a knowledge improvement and a capability improvement. A very small and simple example of a sports science intervention that led to that. And I think the point I'm trying to make with all this is I was able to achieve the things that I did largely on proprioceptive and visual information. Just very crude, qualitative, subjective stuff, which frankly I think is a large history of the research or the understanding of the field of human performance, the advancement of human performance in general, which is why I appreciate what this alliance is doing and what everybody is doing here. I liken it to this analogy. If the moon is out right now, if you go outside and look at the moon, before the telescope was invented, we looked at it and thought it was made of all kinds of weird stuff. And then Galileo pointed the telescope at it and was like, oh yeah, there's a bunch of craters. And just that capability improvement of having that telescope allowed him to increase our knowledge of the universe and understand there's rocks flying around everywhere. And then you fast forward to the James Webb predecessor, the Hubble. We point that thing into the universe, and not only do we see there's way more bright spots than we thought, they're actually all galaxies and not suns. So our knowledge of the universe just totally expanded with this capability. And I think what the Alliance is doing is, look, I was using Galileo's telescope to achieve the things that I did. I think what this Alliance is trying to do is create the Hubbles or find Hubble equivalent information about the universe of the body. Try to find the bright lights there and understand exactly what they are. And so that leads me to a few things. One is you don't win the Olympics in the first year. So something my coach always used to tell me is patience. It'll come. I think there is, especially for an athlete, you get very antsy and you want improvements overnight. You want answers overnight. You want that stick to move again right away. And sometimes, oftentimes, it's just not the case. You have to be patient, and it can be a little unsettling. So you have to deal with that feeling. The second thing is, I guess there's two parts to the second thing. One is challenge. Whatever we just heard and saw today, from my perspective, that is where the stick is. So the question is how to make it go further. And to not be, content with that being the mark. Because again, we don't know. We are trying to answer that question. What are we capable of? So that's a little bit of a challenge. And the third is almost reminds me of what I was like as a freshman as a decathlete. I was just learning this thing that's 10 events and trying to put it all together. I would treat each thing separately, go to each event and try to be like a 100-meter runner, I'm a long jumper, I'm a high jumper. The older I got and the more I competed in this event, it is its own thing. It's a synthesis of things. And so I think in a lot of ways that's what the symposium is about, bringing everybody together to try to synthesize and understand that the findings and the discoveries in these disparate fields, how do they become whole and make a human better? So maybe, again, another challenge to keep learning how to bring everything into a decathlon rather than treat it like separate events. And then the final thing is just to thank you. You guys are trying to impact human performance and impact health on a global scale. And so I just want to thank you for using your life to contribute to progress in that regard.
Can you take some questions?
Yeah. Okay. I am open for questions. I'm very curious to know what they are because no slides, no science.
Thank you, first of all, for that really inspiring talk.
Yeah, sure.
So, you've made an art of listening to your body.
Yes.
And so, when you're in a machine, if you're a race car driver, right? Sometimes you can always tell, you can't push the Ferrari over the red line,
Yeah.
Or you run the risk of losing the race.
Yeah.
So, in your experience, have you ever kind of like gotten injured?
Yep.
And did you, and kind of like the follow-up question is, in retrospect, did you feel that your body was trying to tell you something? And what were they?
The first answer is yes, I got injured. There are experiences where I knew it happened because I had made a mistake from a position standpoint. And then there was an experience when I didn't know it was going to happen. I actually felt the best I ever had. And in that experience, I mean, frankly, that's one of the reasons I decided to retire, because I was getting older and I thought less able to understand what my body is telling me. Maybe I'm like missing the signals. Or I have reached, the red line and it is actually communicating to me in that way. Definitely everything the body does is some form of communication. And that to me was a pretty loud talk, if that made sense. Does that answer your question? I mean, yeah.
Kind of. Yeah, I guess you get some feeling, but sometimes, there are no longer feelings that you can override.
Yep.
Without
And
suffering an injury.
The really hard part is knowing, am I right or am I just making it up? This is why I was saying everything was based on this proprioceptive feel and these visual cues.
Yep.
And yeah, I was really good at listening to my body, but says who?
Right.
Based on what? Just because I was successful? Like, I don't know, maybe I could have been capable of more, but I held back.
Yep.
So that's, again, bringing it back to what the Alliance is doing.
Right.
I was very qualitative, and I feel like this environment is working to quantify some of that stuff and indeed increase the knowledge and therefore increase the capability by giving people more understanding about what it actually is they can do.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Did any of the things you heard today fall into what you think helps you optimize, like time restricted feeding? Maybe I just took the next question away. Or ketone meals and this kind of stuff. Did any of these things you think optimize your performance?
Could they have?
Yeah. Well, or did they?
They
Well,
didn't.
Like, you must have
The only scientific sports science intervention I had was the sweat test.
Is that
Thank you,
right?
Trent. Yeah, so the things that I was keying in on that I thought would be incredibly beneficial as an athlete, or I wish I would have had, were your talk, understanding what foods did certain things. Definitely stuff on nutrition, the delayed part, which is something I think my wife also did, and I reaped the benefits from because I just wouldn't eat with her. And the digital athletes, I mean, all the moonshots, frankly, the multi-scale thing especially was really fascinating because the patience part I was talking about is the longitudinal study part. Like, it took me forever to understand how to listen to my body and like what it was saying. Like, I didn't get good right away. You guys didn't even know about me in 2007, 8, or 9 when I was doing nothing special because I was working to try to get those things up. And so I guess this is to say some of that stuff I think would have accelerated my understanding. And the multi-scale and the digital athlete were two things to me that would have had a massive impact. And the reason is because I'm operating on visual information. And so my brain is trying to discern, like, whatever you want to call it, the kinematics. Like, am I actually faster? Hey, do this thing with your hips, you're going to be faster. It's like I do that thing, hey, yeah, you look faster. Like, what are you talking about? I don't know. Of course we don't know. So quantifying that a little bit more would have been extremely helpful to understand, are the changes that we are making actually resulting in the things that we think they are? I Yeah, I guess I could talk about the old day. The multi-scale thing, though, is super fascinating, maybe because I'm into engineering and science, but understanding molecularly what's happening in these training cycles would have been probably a gift and a curse, frankly. Yeah, maybe I wouldn't want to know. It's like, hey, it looks like you're going to go. It's like, oh, really? I feel great. So
I'm sure you want to know. But
yeah, eventually.
Hi, I'm Maya. I'm on the track team here at Stanford,
Oh, nice.
so I'm a big fan of yours.
Oh, thank you.
So you mentioned that being an elite athlete is like being a scientist and trying to figure out what combination of variables will give you the optimal result. I'm curious how you manage like the mental variables on top of the physical. So like, did you ever have days where you felt like all the physical pieces were in place and you still didn't perform well, and how did you work through that?
Yeah. A lesson that I learned early on was struggle causes growth and vice versa. So to get faster, to get stronger, we have to put ourselves under stress and load, and then our body responds in a certain way to make us better. And so from like a mental perspective, with mental struggles or doubts or fears or anxieties or having to deal with an injury, I kind of approached it the same way, which, hey, this is something that I need to train to overcome. I'm actually glad this happened to me now rather than in a competition. And so that is one way I approach struggle. As far as the mental and the physical not matching up, there were days that what we call feeling off. So, and I could just tell from the very first warm-up run, I would be running and my foot would hit the ground either sooner or later than I thought it would for like several steps. And I was just like, okay, coach, something's off here. And we'd maybe like continue to go through training, see if it would get worked out, whatever that means. But sometimes it wouldn't, and we would just call it. The reason we would call it is because we erred on the side of, I guess, safety in those specific circumstances. So a lot of the decathlon stuff is semi-dangerous, like pole vaults and hurdles and what have you. So yeah. Hopefully that answers your question. We just stopped, quit. Yeah.
Thank you for the inspiring talk.
Yeah, sure.
If you are given the stick and for the alliance you have to set a new goal,
Oh, yes. Okay.
then what will be your 3 big challenges for the alliance that we can deliver for elite athletes?
For elite athletes?
Yeah, or any athletes.
Yeah, I mean, what I was thinking about today mostly was this all makes sense, this all sounds great. And it's definitely harder than it sounds, but okay, enough with the rats, let's do it on the people. And I think it's just one of those things where it's like, you got to get feedback from the actual, I mean, I think there's maybe a difference between like science and product, which I think we're all trying to find that, that translation. But product is like, what do you need? I'll make it, and then you tell me if it's working or not. Science is, what is my question? How do I answer it? And then figure out if that, to me it's like, and then figure out what the problem is to apply that to. So I may be a little bit wrong there, but that's just what it seems like. So I'm thinking for the Alliance, it's after a certain amount of time, what is the Olympic game? What is the date and time that this thing is going to be released into the wild for competition purposes, so you can get some feedback on what you're doing? So whatever the moonshots are, whatever the specific things are, I guess, we can talk about later, but I think that would be my deal for the Alliance. But again, patience, because you're not going to win the Olympics in the first year. This is still a very young group of folks getting stuff together. So,
Thank you.
Hi. Two quick questions. What was the most challenging of the 10 events for you?
sure.
And did that change as you
Got older, yeah.
got stronger, faster, more developed? And secondly, what's it like that night in between day 1 and 2?
Sure. The most challenging event for me was the high jump, and it was very hard for me to get my body in the correct positions to do that. It sucks because I can actually jump high. I just can't high jump. And the older I got, the harder that was. So, we were talking about patella problems, and I was like, yeah, well, been there. Yeah, decathlon is super interesting. In between day 1 and day 2 was, I was sleeping, so it was great. But then I woke up and it was hellish. The way that decathlon works in international competition, it's obviously a 2-day event. Each day is like about 13 hours long. Get up at 5, warm up, blah, 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 eat. Then you have to start your competition at 9 for the first event. The last event usually ends at 10. And then you do cool down, media, da-da-da. So you get to bed at midnight and you wake up at 5 again. And so after like 13 hours of doing stuff and then coming back the next day to do more stuff, you're just like, I don't even know why I do this. There's way harder events. Ultra marathons and triathlons and that kind of stuff. But for that specifically, it was just, in between, you rush everything and you don't recover as well as you should. And you don't eat as well as you should. And you sleep like crap. And then you get up and you're like, okay, I'm ready to be an elite athlete today. Sure.
Something that you said really resonated with me, which is that sometimes you're doing everything right, but you get a bad outcome.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're doing bad things, but you still get a good outcome.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you can tell us in a little bit more granular detail, maybe with some examples, of how you figured out what buckets you were in.
Yeah, I don't know if you do, but the thing would be in sport, so like shot put, for example, there's a very specific technique that you're supposed to do. Because of the constraints of the event, but also because what people think makes the thing go far. And so that's what we're all kind of operating on. And so I would try to do those things. And I would do what I thought would be the right thing based on what my coach was telling me, based on what I saw on video, based on what I was feeling. And, the thing would not go far. And so you're doing everything right, and you have that bad outcome, which is what you're talking about. And in those instances, it's actually the easiest one, I think, because I think there's more at play. Like maybe you are tired, or maybe you did something late. I guess the real thing is you didn't do everything right. It is complex, and I was simplifying it, but you did a majority of the things right, and it still didn't go far, so you're missing something, which is fascinating about sport because oftentimes it's a very small percentage of a thing that results in not something great happening or something great happening. You can do a lot of stuff really good, and then there's a little bit, you're like, I just missed it. As far as the do something bad and something good happens, there's instances, I think, where you just think you know what is right, but you've actually made a discovery and for yourself personally, and the thing has results in a good outcome. One of the examples is, again, in the shot put. I was doing the shot put technique, which is typically like this glide thing where you like fling your leg up in the air and you throw it, and it wasn't always great for me, and I got pissed off at practice one day, so I kind of shuffle stepped and threw the shot put against the wall. And when I did this shuffle step, I felt super powerful, even though it wasn't like the right technique. And I said, Coach, we should shuffle step. And he goes, Ash, try the shuffle step. I don't care, let's do it. Which is great, because he's always open to this experimentation. Anyway, I did the shuffle step for the remainder of my career, and it was way better. And so I think there's, maybe the point I was trying to make with that is, we come into our environments and a certain system with an idea of like what things should be or how the technique should be, and that may not always be the case. I think sometimes bad things happen that lead to good outcomes. It is confusing, but there's a grain in there that obviously has made it good, and so it's your job to figure it out. Hey, it has really been a pleasure to be in this environment with you guys. It's been awesome. Looking forward to chatting later. Thank you. Scott.